Okay, continuing on with part 3 of Robert A. Johnson's book, Inner Work, that we've been working on. And this is the part on the active imagination. And the first section is titled Defining and Approaching Active Imagination. Alright. In the pages ahead, we will be exploring the art of active imagination and learning 4 steps for working with it. Before we begin, there's a fundamental precaution that everyone must take. Before starting active imagination, be sure that there is someone available for you to go to or call in case you become overwhelmed by the imagination and can't cut it off. But then it says, for most people this is not a problem. In fact, for most people the difficulty is in getting the active imagination started. But some few people are subject to being so totally possessed by the flow of images once they start a particularly powerful segment of active imagination that they can't pull out of it. Their mind gets lost in the realm of fantasy and can't find the way back to the here and now of the ordinary world. Therefore, I advise people to start active imagination only after they have available to them either an analyst or a layperson who is familiar with the art and could talk them back down to earth if required. Once in a while, one will do active imagination in the morning, go to work or start the daily schedule, and then find the imagination returning, taking over the conscious mind, trying to continue the story or dialogue where it left off earlier in the day. When this happens, it may be difficult to keep one's mind on the task at hand. In this case, it is best to call one's therapist or friend and get some help in pulling out of the involuntary recurring active imagination. In the rare cases of people who get easily lost in the fantasy realm and can't find their way back, it is better that they not do active imagination, but find cooler ways of relating to their inner world. It says, "In you have any doubts," I think it's "if you have any doubts." If you have any doubts about this, it would be advisable to consult with a Jungian analyst before undertaking this technique. This is not meant to discourage you from doing inner work, but the unconscious is powerful. That's what we were talking about. If we are going to approach it, respect and care are in order. You must have respect for the power that is within you, the power that creates worlds. Okay, let's just pause for a second and think about that. Within you, within me, we have the power to create worlds within us. How often in your day are you cognizant of that? Sorry, my dog is snoring in the background, but how often through our days are we thinking, okay, I'm a powerful creator. Within me I have the power that creates worlds, which manifests this whole experience, because the world within is a reflection of the world without. How often are we thinking about that? Sorry, I'm getting a call, but it's just, I know I don't go through my day thinking about that, and so it's just, this is getting us into a place of harmony with who we are, the power within, the worlds within, and how we can impress our inner and our unconscious and integrate it with our conscious mind so that we can start to create and manifest in our outward world. And if you're not aware of that, and then you just slip into this without that reverence and respect for what you're really delving into and what you're really trying to explore, don't dabble, don't think, oh yeah, let me just see if I can just interpret this one dream because it's fun and funny, or it's just, yeah, let me go over my one-eyed cat dream and just see, if it means that I'm supposed to buy a kitten. No, there's something way deep under the surface in there. The symbols of your unconscious is trying to speak to you, and when it speaks to you and you're not really respecting it, I think that's when things go awry, when you're dabbling in things that you don't understand, like people that play with dark magic because their intent is to manipulate and to distort the power that we harness and that we have. And it's a no-no. There's a higher power that we're working with here, and it will reflect to you what you are giving to it. Your intention is very, very crucial in anything that you do. So I think that this is less of a warning of how bad things can go for you just in general, but it's just a question of where's your heart and where's your head and what's your intention. Make sure that's right before you do this, because don't underestimate the power that you have. And that's in everyday life. We always have the power, whether you're doing this or not. But when you start to do it actively, you need to know what you're creating. But also, if you're not doing this, just know that you're still creating your experience, everything around you. And if your experience is not so good, that's in the same token, you're still not respecting your unconscious, your ability to create your experience. But let me move forward with this. With this attitude, we can derive, and this again is the attitude of respect and care. With this attitude, we can derive the benefits of inner work while still protecting ourselves from the sometimes overwhelming power of the unconscious. Distinguishing active imagination from passive fantasy. Active imagination is a special use of the power of imagination that Jung developed early in this century. Although many people have used it and its tremendous value is well proven, it is not widely known outside of Jungian circles. Of those who have heard of it, many people feel they do not understand it well enough to put it into practice. In this section, we will explore the basic concepts of active imagination, look at some examples, and learn a step-by-step approach that you can follow in doing your own active imagination. Essentially, active imagination is a dialogue that you enter into with the different parts of yourself that live in the unconscious. In some ways, it is similar to dreaming, except that you are fully awake and conscious during the experience. This, in fact, is what gives this technique its distinctive quality. Instead of going into a dream, you go into your imagination while you're awake. You allow the images to rise up out of the unconscious, and they come to you on the level of imagination just as they would come to you in dream if you were asleep. In your imagination, you begin to talk to your images and interact with them. They answer back. You are startled to find out that they express radically different viewpoints from those of your conscious mind. They tell you things you never consciously knew and express thoughts that you never consciously thought. How interesting. Most people do a fair amount of talking in their active imagination, exchanging points of view with the inner figures, trying to work out a middle ground between opposing views, even asking for advice from some very wise ones who live in the unconscious. But not all dialogue is verbal or spoken. Probably the earliest recorded experience of active imagination in its modern form was a visionary experience of Jung in which no words were spoken. Yet there was a profound interaction between his conscious mind and the images that appeared to him from the unconscious. This was one of the experiences that demonstrated to Jung that he could go into his fantasy or vision, participate consciously in it, and make it into an active exchange between the conscious and unconscious energy systems. And here's an excerpt from Jung's book on this topic. He says, "I was sitting at my desk once more, thinking over my fears. Then I let myself drop. Suddenly it was as though the ground literally gave way beneath my feet, and I plunged down into dark depths. I could not fend off a feeling of panic. But then, abruptly, at not too great a depth, I landed on my feet in a soft, sticky mass. I felt great relief, although I was apparently in complete darkness. After a while, my eyes grew accustomed to the gloom, which was rather like a deep twilight. Before me was the entrance to a dark cave in which stood a dwarf with a leathery skin, as if he were mummified. I squeezed past him through the narrow entrance and waded knee-deep through icy water to the other end of the cave, where on a projecting rock I saw a glowing red crystal. I grasped the stone, lifted it, and discovered a hollow underneath. At first I could make out nothing, but then I saw that there was running water. In it a corpse floated by, a youth with blonde hair and a wound in the head. He was followed by a gigantic black scarab, and then by a red newborn sun, S-U-N, rising up out of the depths of the water. What in the world? Man, I just got to think about it like this. This is some very active imagination here. This is crazy. The stuff that comes up, man. I hope it goes into what that was like. It doesn't have to, because that's for him. It's his interpretation, his active imagination. And like I was telling you in the other video when I talked about Abby Normal's, her YouTube channel, which is great because she does this. She's very, very good at this. And I didn't even know when I started listening to it, her channeling is using active imagination. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. I have to watch some more. I've only seen a few, but they were brilliant. I was moved by those very, very, very much so. She's talented. Okay, and I love the most about her, one last thing, is that she always says, you can do this. I can show you how to do this, or you can just watch and listen to my other videos where I show you how to do this. Every one of us has this ability, this power. Any of those people that put themselves up to posture as a guru or a prophet or someone who has the knowledge that you must only pay to come into having is part of the system, the American standard system that says profit over people, like, no, this is a gift. It's not a gift, it's your innate self. What's that way they say it? It's your birthright. Each and every one of our birthright. We are the owners of these abilities and these strengths and these gifts. Ignorance has kept us away from them. Now, ignorance would make you pay for something that is already yours. You simply have to remember. And that's what we're doing. People share information. You discern and you come to rise up the ladder of knowing, and then unlocking your ability to act upon it and manifest the life you want and dream and deserve. So moving on. He goes through, this is back to Robert A. Johnson. Through active imagination, it becomes more and more clear that the images that appear in imagination are in fact symbols representing deep interior parts of ourselves. Like dream images, they symbolize the contents of our own unconscious. Because these interior beings have minds of their own, in quotes, they say and do things that are new to us, startling, often enlightening, sometimes offensive to our egos. Although Jung held dreams in high regard, he considered active imagination to be an even more effective path to the unconscious. The difference is this. When you dream, you receive signals from the unconscious, but the conscious mind does not participate. When you wake up, the conscious mind can remember the dream and think about its meaning, but during the dream itself, the conscious mind cannot actively participate. I would imagine this is regular dreaming, not lucid dreaming, where you in fact do participate consciously in a dream while you're in the unconscious state. In active imagination, by contrast, the conscious mind is awake. It participates consciously in the events. In dreams, the events happen completely at the unconscious level. In active imagination, the events take place on the imaginative level, which is neither conscious nor unconscious, but a meeting place, a common ground where both meet on equal terms and together create a life experience that combines the elements of both. The two levels of consciousness flow into each other in the field of imagination like two rivers that merge to form one powerful stream. They complement each other, they begin to work together, and as a result, your totality begins to form itself into a unity. The dialogue of the conscious mind with unconscious gives rise to the transcendent function, the self, that stands as a synthesis of the two. It is a curious fact that dreaming decreases dramatically when one does active imagination. If you take this art seriously as a way of meditation, you actually assimilate the material of the unconscious before it needs to come up in dream form. The issues that would have been presented in dreams are confronted and worked through out of the active imagination. That's awesome. So essentially, as long as we are dreaming, we have something that needs to be addressed in our unconscious world and integrated into our conscious world. As long as we are dreaming, we have something that needs to be addressed. And when we work through those things, and integrate them consciously, then we have significantly less dreams. That's interesting. Because of this relationship between dreams and active imagination, Jung used to prescribe active imagination for people who were dreaming too much, who were overwhelmed by too many dreams every night and couldn't keep up with them by dream work. When you begin to do active imagination regularly, you will find that your dreams decrease in number, will become more focused and concentrated and less repetitious. As you deal with the issues in active imagination, your dreams have less need to repeat themselves. The essence of active imagination is your conscious participation in the imaginative experience. This kind of imagination is active because the ego actually goes into the inner world, walks and talks, confronts and argues, makes friends with or fights with the persons that it finds there. You consciously take part in the drama of your imagination. In your imagination. You consciously take part in the drama in your imagination. You engage the other actors in conversation, exchange viewpoints, go through adventures together, and eventually learn something from each other. Sorry, I had to sneeze, but I did that thing where you lick the roof of your mouth. It tickles, but it works. This quality makes active imagination different from ordinary passive fantasy. Passive fantasy is daydreaming. There's a distinction. It is sitting and merely watching the stream of fantasy that goes on in the back of your mind as though you were at a movie, it says. In passive fantasy, you do not consciously participate, you do not reflect on what is happening, and you do not take an independent, ethical position regarding what is going on. Passive fantasy also presents images from the unconscious, but since we can't consciously enter into it, it is mostly a waste of time and energy. So don't be confused between imagination, active imagination, and daydreaming. Active imagination is very deliberate, very concentrated effort, and daydreaming is kind of just getting lost in your unconscious, just like images and just watching a movie, so to speak. Not making any positions or efforting to come to resolutions and integrate your unconscious with your conscious reality. The issues or problems that come up in the fantasy don't get resolved. Most such fantasies, just repeat themselves over and over again on the edges of our minds until they exhaust themselves or exhaust us. There is no evolution because the ego never confronts the fantasy situation or enters into it as a conscious, independent force. A good example of this is the phenomenon of worry. Worry is one form of passive fantasy. Most of us have subjects that we worry about day in and day out. A fantasy runs through our minds in which we triumph and everything works out well. Then the counter fantasy, the worry fantasy, arises in which we are defeated and humiliated. So long as we sit passively and let the worry fantasies possess us, there is never a resolution. But in active imagination, it is possible to go to the worry, actively confront it, enter into dialogue with it, find out who or what is in conflict within us, and do something about it. It's amazing. You will notice in all the examples of active imagination, we look at the story that is always related in the first person. Let me read that again. You will notice in all the examples of active imagination, we look at the story. Okay, I'm getting it now. You will notice in all the examples of active imagination we look at that the story is always related in the first person. The I is always there. I go to a certain place. I see the image. I interact with it. The I has to be there, interacting with the other characters, or else the ego would not be participating. It is not active unless you are participating in the drama with your feelings and emotions. I have a feeling reaction. I am happy with what happens, interested, sad, or angry. The I must enter into the imaginative act as intensely as it would if it were an external physical experience. Although it is a symbolic experience, it is still a real experience involving real feelings. By your active participation, you convert what would have been an unconscious, passive fantasy into a highly conscious, powerful act of the imagination. When active imagination is done correctly, it pulls the different parts of you together that have been fragmented or in conflict. It wakens you powerfully to the voices inside you, and it brings about peace and cooperation between the warring ego and unconscious. The main purpose of this art is to provide communication between the ego and the parts of the unconscious that we are usually cut off from. When you do active imagination, things change in the psyche. The relationship between the ego and the unconscious is altered. If there is a neurotic imbalance between the attitudes of ego and the values of the unconscious, the gap can be narrowed. The complementary opposites can be brought together. It sets one off on a path toward wholeness, toward an awareness of one's larger totality, simply because one has learned to enter into communication with the inner self. That's fantastic. All right, I'm going to pause it right here and I'm going to make a new video. Hold on one second.